It's the Leading on Purpose podcast, helping leaders, teams, and organizations lead more intentionally, effectively, and with purpose. Hey there, Doug and I are excited to be back with another episode of the Leading on Purpose podcast. Today's conversation, I think, will become kind of a multi-session, multi-episode conversation around change and change leadership, and lots to share with you in terms of our own experiences and insights around how to successfully navigate change yourself, lead others through change. But as Doug and I kind of talked about, where do we want to start this maybe series of conversations around change? We agreed maybe talking about what needs to happen before change launches could be a really interesting place to start. What's interesting, in my leadership journey, when I first got exposed to the importance of, one, accepting change, being good at being a change agent, if you will, the need as a leader to be able to effectively help others get through change. I can remember at the time, it was like, change is a hot topic. Well, that was like 15 years ago. And so it just seems to be this evergreen topic, change, that just hasn't gone away. And it's as resonant and important today as it was, the first time I was exposed to it. Has that been your experience as well? Just change is just this ever constant thing we got to pay attention to. And it's at the top of the list.
Yeah, absolutely. My a little bit older than you, so I have even more distant memories of the topic of change in organizations. But it's always been there, and there's as you um, made your comments, a quote came to me I haven't thought about in a long, long time, and I can't even remember the book where this was published. But to me, it was true then. It's even truer today. This gentleman used to say, "The future is coming sooner than ever before." And so not only is change been in our organizations, I think what has continued to evolve is the pace of the change
Yeah.
and the necessity to do it well, to do it quickly as we become more proficient from a technology standpoint, data, information that we have, insights that we have. And if you don't do that well from a competitive standpoint, it'll put you out of business. So yes, it's been there forever, and I think the pace of the change, the intensity of change, the opportunities for change is as um, challenging as I've ever seen in my career.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that makes me think about is, and hopefully we can help people with this through these conversations around change. There's a difference between moving and changing so fast that the wheels are falling off the organization. That's helter skelter. And so certainly don't want to scare people off and just have you trying to live in a world that is so moving so fast that we've lost our sense of purpose and it's going in a million scattered directions simultaneously. Yep. That's not what we're proposing here. But there is a pace that needs to be alongside the changes that you're making. Change needs to be intentional, needs to be thought out, and needs to be well connected to the organization's direction, obviously. And it does need to be rapid. And so my hope is through this, Doug, that you and I can help both organizations and leaders think through how to balance, moving fast enough, but not so fast that our wheels are flying off and we can't handle it.
Yeah. Well, John, and maybe a good starting point for just the general conversation around change and deciding when it's appropriate is due to the intensity of the information that we have, the competitive landscape for so many organizations today. It is very easy. You talk about pace, just to jump in and do. And so I think high excelling organizations have that ability to live in both the world of that fast pace, but also the discipline that it takes to talk, to discuss, to gather information, to get input, to determine what in the world is going on in our organization. So it's an art to it. It's the fast and the intentionality that you mentioned, I think, is so important.
Yeah, and the discipline piece you mentioned is very difficult because I think what can make change really impactful is being as thoughtful around what we're not going to do as what we are going to do. Because you
Yep.
can't choose everything. You can't be all things to all people as an organization, much less as a leader. And so being very thoughtful and intentional around what do we have to say no to be able to say yes to these few initiatives we are going to try to implement. And so
Yep.
the discipline piece is a big one for me.
Yep.
I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yep.
So I guess maybe the next jump for me then is prioritization. So if we're going to be thoughtful around what we are doing, what we aren't doing, we've got to get it in our minds. How do we prioritize change? So where does that process start for you? What's been your experience with how to prioritize change?
Well, John, so I'll maybe answer that from two stages of my career. So early on, when I was initially in leadership positions, and you're very close to your particular function, what you're responsible for, from a priority standpoint, it I felt like I was in more control, had better information around, okay, of the five or six, just making numbers up here, that as we think about this next year for this team that I'm responsible for, what would make the most impact for us if we served internal customers? What would make the most impact for them? And so, one of the things I try to do, sometimes better than others, is to really, with my team, understand what's working well today, what's not working as well, where might we need to change, what's the extent of the change. Sometimes, you might rate the change, well, this is a bit of a tweak. Okay, this would be a major overhaul, not only for us but the customers that we serve. So I think part of it, John, at that level in the organization, if you're a leader that's responsible for a particular function, a particular team, is to gather that information, have those conversations. And I always enjoyed that work. I just felt like it just helps you stay connected to your people and what's going on. Then, John, I found it as I progressed in my career and I started sitting in senior leadership positions, you face different challenges. Number one, just the breadth and scope of what you're responsible for as a senior leader is far greater. So when you have a single team with a pretty narrow focus, it's much easier to have those conversations around what's going on, what are our priorities, than when you're a senior leader responsible for a wider organization. But the thing I found to be most challenging, and if it's not handled well, it can absolutely be destructive in an organization, is when you have senior leaders sitting around the table bringing their own respective priorities to the table. Here's what we need to do, the initiatives, the change that we need to implement. So if I'm representing my organization's agenda, my colleague sitting next to me has his or her agenda with all their change initiatives that they're thinking. And then you go around the table, and if you've got 6, 7, 8 senior leaders, by the time you look at you could have 50, 60, 70 different ideas. So John, I think senior teams that function well are the ones that, one, provide the opportunity to get those ideas on the table. But then it's the old adage, who's your first team?
Right.
When I think it works well from a prioritization standpoint when you have leaders that understand the first team that they serve is not their respective organization, but the broader organization and the good of it, which means, as hard as it is, sometimes you don't get everything you want or need. It doesn't mean the idea or the change that you want to implement isn't a good one, wouldn't have value. It's just, if you stack it up against the rest of the needs of the organization, it just doesn't make the cut. And so, John, those are the conversations and times when I look back at my career that were the most challenging. And when that works well, it's powerful, the results that you can get. When it doesn't work well, it sets up turf battles.
Yes.
It sets up arguing over resources. It sets up senior leaders not playing nicely together.
Yep.
And that ripple effect can just be so detrimental to an organization. So, Um, it's the same types of things that you talk about. It's just at the different levels of the organization. It's a tougher conversation, I think, as you advance in your career.
Yeah. Yeah. A few things come to mind. One is you end up with a lot of little fiefdoms, and it's
Yep.
a I'm going to get mine mentality. I think what's interesting, and this is very much related to a lot of the leadership topics you and I have covered on the podcast in prior episodes. Very rarely do those behaviors again come from ill intent. It's You've got
Right.
a senior leader in these situations getting up and feeling like I need to justify myself on the payroll. I need to bring my expertise to bear. I owe it to this organization. Let's say I'm the head of IT, just as for instance, we need to be a best in class IT organization. That's my job here. Well, to your point, if everyone at that table, all six, seven of the lead, we got to be best in class at marketing, we got to be best in class at IT, we got to be best in class at this and that. You can understand how quickly, to your point, you end up with 60 or 70 different potential ideas that could really tear the organization apart if they were all implemented simultaneously.
Yep.
And so the other word that comes to mind is the need for compromise and negotiated agreement to really get clear as a first team, as you said, that we're clear. Boy, if this is our vision or mission, let's hold that up. Let's put that on the wall. What would be the very few things, the two or three or four maybe things that would have to be true around us as an organization a year from now, 2 years from now, that would serve as evidence or proof that we are who we say we are? We are achieving the vision we set forth. We stand for the purpose or mission that we say that we do. And so compromising and negotiating against that is really important. And to your point, I think that same conversation can really happen at any level. Just it takes on a
Yep.
different breadth, if
Yep.
you will, at that
Yep.
top level. But similarly, if you imagine yourself inside the organization running a department or a smaller team, you've got the same challenge, which is to really think about, okay, if our vision is a subset of the overall vision of the organization, it's a piece of that overall pie. What would have to be true about our department or team in the next year, 2 years? The very few, two, three, maybe even four things we would need to achieve that stand best in service of the bigger vision.
Yep.
And do I have colleagues and peers that I have to negotiate with that are on my first team? And it's a real challenge, but if those conversations aren't happening, it can really tear an organization apart. I'm not just speaking from a consulting perspective. I'm speaking from personal experience as well, just seeing what it can do to an organization, really rip it apart.
Yeah.
And again, not from a place of ill intent. No one gets
Right.
up in the morning and says, I want to piss my team off. I want to lead the organization astray. Um, it's out of the best of intent. Hey, I want the best of my organization. I owe it to this organization for us to be the best at what I offer. Maybe not.
Right. Well, I I had to laugh. I just remember years ago, especially my younger leadership years, but if I'm really honest with myself, probably even in my more advanced leadership years, one of the things that I had to learn not to do is, people throughout the organization know when budgets are being developed, when conversations are happening, and they're sometimes on pins and needles here. What's the outcome? And it's kind. I remember coming back to my team, and they're looking at me like, "Did we win?" And their thought of win is here's all the stuff that we had on our list, things that we want to change, things that we want to do differently, investments that need to be made. And I felt this pressure, even today. I can still remember feeling this pressure is, oh my gosh, they're evaluating me as a leader based on the quality of arguments that I made in the boardroom and whether or not we got it. And it's just not effective. And what I had to work hard to do is to come back and not talk about in terms of did we win or not. Here are decisions that are made. Here's why those decisions were made. I've always felt like that I had an obligation to help my team understand the idea that we came up with a great idea and people saw value in it. Here's why we're not doing that this year, because we need to fund this. We need to have this change going on in the organization. And, John, some people would get it and some people wouldn't get it and be sometimes even beyond disappointed. They just be upset about that. So I would try my best just to notice that those lingering experiences and reactions that people have are still there, and just follow up with them and make sure that they still feel valued, they feel heard. The ideas they suggested were good ones, but here's why we're not doing it as an organization. The other thing I would throw in there too, you talked about conversations. One of the things that I learned, especially more as a senior leader, is the worst time for your colleagues to be hearing about these initiatives and the change that you want to implement and the funding for those things. The worst time for them to hear about it for the first time is at that budget meeting. And I received coaching from one of the CEOs that I reported to around how important it is to socialize those ideas and have those lunch conversations, or just set up a time to chat over a cup of coffee. Uh, and by the way, it doesn't have to involve food or drink, but
It helps.
seems like that. Yeah, it helps.
Grease the
Or
skids.
even more powerful kinds of drinks can help. But he was dead on right. It's especially since I always led what I would call support organizations.
Mhm.
I wasn't in operations. There was just only the briefest periods of time in my leadership career did I ever lead an organization that made money for the company. We
Yeah.
were always those organizations that supported the organization and didn't generate revenue. So it's like you have to make sure you've got an audience and support before you and your team work hard and deeply on these ideas around what you want to change. And he was right. And sometimes an idea that I thought made all the sense in the world, as I had a few conversations, like, oh my gosh, they're not getting it, they're not seeing it, or maybe they do, and they're just like, Doug, we just can't handle one more change in our organization this next year. If you want to implement this new platform on top of all the other change we have going on, it's not going to work well. And so I'd rather have those conversations before I go to the table and not even bring the ideas to the table. So conversing, socializing ideas, prioritizing is so important, especially as you grow in your leadership career.
Yeah. So I feel like a few tactics are emerging here as we talk on how to maybe start to think about before I launch change. Being thoughtful around what changes can we implement, should we implement. So first and foremost, this prioritization piece, this conversation, no matter what level you're at in the
Yep.
organization, as a first team, meaning you and your colleagues and peers, again, regardless of the level in the organization. What's that refined list of 2, 3, maybe even 4 things that we have to do that serve as the strongest evidence of what we stand for as an organization or as a department or team? So from there, I'm hearing, I heard a tinge in what you're saying of the importance of honoring what is the organization able to handle.
Yep.
And I think about that maybe on in 2 respects. One, what can we execute on? Because I had the opportunity to kind of live in both worlds. I did work in
Yep.
operations for a number of years and was generating revenue directly to the organization's bottom line, and then got the opportunity back half of my corporate career to be on the other side, as you were, more in a supporting cast.
Yep.
And it's amazing how fast you lose sight of what can the organization actually execute on. And so what might be a brilliant idea from an L&D, leadership development, sophisticated HR, talent management perspective, if it's not practical for your organization to be able to execute on it, if you can't get every leader on the operations team to a place where they can successfully execute on it, how successful is the idea actually going to be?
Yep.
And then related to that, you've got the merit of the idea here, which a lot of us wake up in the morning and say, I want to initiate change. I want to do good for my organization. And so when I bring my expertise to bear, I want the merit of my ideas to just be really strong. And it's been my experience, working with organizations on change leadership, studying change leadership. And by the way, a lot of the content side of this that I'll bring to this change conversation, Doug, as you know, but for our listeners, comes from Pritchett. And one of the things they've studied a lot, they're an organization out of Dallas, Texas, who work heavily in the change leadership space. They support organizations with mergers and acquisitions, high velocity change. One of the things that they are big on that is rung true as I've observed and worked with organizations is the merit of the idea actually matters less. The buy-in that you're able to generate throughout the organization will usually trump the quality of the idea. And so you've got to think about those two things in terms of what can this organization handle, what can they execute on, and what level of buy-in are we likely to be able to generate around this idea. And so those, maybe start with this prioritization piece. What are those 2, 3, or 4 top level ideas that would have to be true? And then can we do it? Can the organization execute on it? And what level of buy-in will it take for this to be successful? Will we be able to generate the level of buy-in required to make this idea work? And so a couple ideas and maybe a couple tactics emerging here as we're talking about this. One final thought, and I want to get your reaction to this, is just honoring the organization's overall level of capacity.
Yep.
And I worked for a leader once that used to use the analogy, how many planes can we land in a year? We got a lot of planes up in the sky and they're circling right now. And so just honoring what can the organization as a whole actually implement in a year's time. And so that's something that's got to be factored in.
Yeah, it does. And John, even so, to take that idea to a very tactical level, and even from an organizational design standpoint, you and I both worked in organizations and have consulted with organizations that will create a team, a function within their organization that when they get up in the morning, what they're thinking about are the initiatives and the change going on in the organization. And it becomes like a funnel
Yep.
that they go through. And I've seen it executed in different ways. The one organization I was involved in as a leader that did it really well, they had it was a way for us to keep track on how the various change initiatives were going. And by going, I mean just the typical project management
Yep.
element of it. So we had lots of project managers that were very good at leading these change initiatives and projects and keeping them on track in terms of timelines, in terms of budget. The thing that this organization I thought did really well, and it takes a lot of courage to do this. How often have we seen an organization launch some kind of change initiative only to get into it and go, oh, crap. This isn't going to work, or oh my goodness, what we thought was kind of the root cause or the issue going on here that this initiative, this change addresses really wasn't it. So there was just this constant evaluation of, let's say it's make up a number here, $20 million change project, and you've already burned through 10 million of it. And you're starting to have the hesitation around, wow, was this the right decision? Was this a good and it's funny to me, and these are folks that probably never took a finance class. It's done well. We've already spent the first 10. We better go. It's like the whole sunk cost
Yeah.
concept is important. And you talk about having courage for a leader, especially senior leaders, stand up in an organization, say we got it wrong,
Yeah. We got to scrap it.
and we're going to stop it. Yeah, we burned through $10 million on this. We are not going to burn through the rest of that budget because it no longer works for us. But John, whatever an organization needs to do, especially this would be a larger organization, to just be very mindful of how they're monitoring the change and managing it. The other thing it does, to me, the big help is it sizes it for the organization. So you mentioned in your comments the capacity. This particular function was very good at understanding all the change that's been approved, the projects, the initiatives. They had a way of understanding when is it too much.
Yeah.
When do you need to push back and say, sometimes it's just a flat out no, we're just not going to be able to manage this, or yes, but it's going to start 8 months from now instead of immediately. So there's a timing and sequencing that can happen that can really help organizations with this. But again, it's about that discipline of understanding how it all fits together and the overall impact it's going to have. Especially you and I worked in worlds where we had a corporate office setting with operations throughout the United States. And so your folks in operations, your field folks, individual departments at corporate think, well, this isn't that big a change.
Right.
Well, by itself,
Right.
yeah. But then you multiply it by times what you're doing and marketing's doing and R&D is doing. And John, you've been on the receiving end of that as an operator. It's like enough is enough. Do they not understand we've got customers to serve out here? It's almost like we're more of service to the corporate office than we are to our customers that we serve. So it's it's important to get that right.
Yeah, and this just came to me, but there's an irony almost there, when you talk about having the courage as a senior leadership team to say, "Hey, we sunk 10 million. We're not going to blow another 10 just because we said we were doing this. We're going to have the courage to pivot here." It's ironic that organizations would expect everyone within the organization to be agile, nimble, and vulnerable as change is hitting, but then not do that themselves, not have the courage and the vulnerability amidst a change initiative to say, you know what, this isn't going the way that we expected. It's not tracking, it's not proving itself out. We're going to pivot. And so
Yeah.
having that same flexibility and nimble, agile approach that you're expecting your team to have as they're adopting change, it's kind of ironic to me. And so I think
Yeah.
you do have to have that courage to be able to track it and pivot. But the other thing that brings to mind is, when we go to implement change, is identifying, well, we're not going to wait 2 years till this thing is done to say whether it's worked or not. So mapping out of what will be the milestones, what are the markers of success as we implement this that we're going to pay close attention to, that if we don't hit those, what's our recourse? What, are we going to pivot? Do we change something about it? Do we bring in more resources? How do we monitor that along the way? I think is an important part that comes right after, before launch, but right after we've decided what are we going to implement. Well, how do we know? What are we going to look at to indicate to us whether it's working?
Yeah. Well, John, that played out at extreme. We've both used the word courage. What is the courage part of that? Well, uh, it takes courage to stand up and say a mistake was made. And at the extremes, the ramification of that for a leader that would prevent them from having the courage to do that is, am I going to lose my role
Right.
in this organization? And I've been involved in situations like that where, yeah, that was a really bad decision. And probably shouldn't have gone there. And yeah, that's such a bad decision. We've now lost confidence in that leader's ability to make future decisions. And unfortunately, people will lose their role in an organization when that happens. But I'll tell you what, it's easy to say on a conversation for you and I doing this, but when it's your world, to understand that the needs of this organization and everyone that we're serving, our shareholders, our associates, our customers, are far more important than me and my job security here. But it's you talk about courage, is to understand when you have to own something that's may not bode well for your own credibility, and even if you're not shown the exit door, just know you're gonna take a hit in terms of your credibility. But here's the good news in that: when I've seen that handled well, you can gain a lot of respect inside an organization. Now, people aren't going to say, well, we'll give you one $10 million mistake every year. That's your allowance from it. No, you just can't keep doing it. But I have seen those situations play out where some leaders handle it really well and other leaders just dig in due to their ego needs, due to their concern about their own job security. But it's courage. It takes courage.
Yeah. Well, continuing on that courage thread, I think there's a couple other things to consider. One is it relates to prioritization. So let's pretend you're having that first team conversation, and there's some good compromise taking place, and we're narrowing it down to the two, three, or four things we know need to be true about our achievements for us to honor what we stand for. And we decide on a change initiative. As you get in back into the departments that are represented at that table, so let's say it's the executive team, and as a first team, they've agreed on the top level things that are going to need to be implemented. As they go back to their respective teams, another aspect of courage that's required as the executives turn around to talk to their teams is to identify what priorities need to shift within those departments. So it's not just the priorities at the top level, the executive table that need to shift, but as we get back with our teams and into those functional areas, what needs to give way to make this possible? And I found that if you, as an executive leader, aren't creating a heck of a lot of safety and comfort in your team, you're going to see a lack of courage on the part of your
Yep.
team to be bold enough to share with you, hey, boss, here's a couple things that are, frankly, I've been really excited to support and lead. I'm good at these things. Maybe a couple of these things I was actually hired to do. I think, in light of what you're sharing with me as priorities of the organization, these no longer fit.
Yep.
And so, on the other side of that courage, well, how do I foster the courage of my team to share that? I've got to create a heck of a lot of safety. And so, it's just kind of continuing this courage thread. You're going to need that from your respective leaders within your teams and departments to have meaningful conversations around, what Pritchett honestly calls a priority audit. We got to get within every team, every department, every person needs to audit their priorities, because one of the worst things that can happen in organizations is we all show up for the big town hall, right? And the executives there, and they're getting us excited and jazzed up around the two new big changes that are coming up. And there's not really a conversation. There's just download and excitement.
Yep.
And people get back to their desk and realize, well, we've got these two new things that I just heard about at the town hall. The 15 things I was already engaged with haven't changed at all. And in fact, they're the same things I've been focused on all along. And no one's really talking to me around, do any of those things change or shift? Where do those two new things fit amongst this? We'll get more into that as we talk about the change model and tactics you can use as a leader. But this prioritization piece is not just for a first team. It's when you turn around and start to talk to your second team. How do I foster the right amount of courage to really get serious around what priorities will stand in our way?
Yeah. Well, John, she talked about that. One of the things that was coming to me is, that individual that had just attended the town hall and heard about the two big splashy ideas and come back, it's like, well, here are these 15 other things. And, if you have people in the organization that's their continual experience, that can get really old
Real fast.
really fast. And so it's, to me, when you talk about change, it's not necessarily all or nothing. And, I can remember times where there was an idea that I was hoping to implement with my team. And um, sometimes, sometimes I think it's better just to get a flat out, no, you're not doing it. Or, yeah, go implement. It's that in-betweener stuff. It's like, well, I know you guys are requesting, I'll make a number up, $100,000 for this. We can't go 100. But what could you do for 30? And, my initial reaction would be, well, just forget it then. Keep your $30,000. But no, then it's smaller change, smaller wins than maybe we'd hope for. And I think people need a sense of that. It's like, you know what? We didn't get the thumbs up on the $100,000. We did get 30 grand. And let us kind of revisit our perspective and our thinking and our expectation. Maybe this was something we'd hope to do over this next year. What would it look like if this now becomes a 3-year change initiative? that we're involved in. And maybe each of the next 3 years, we get that $30,000. So it's not the prize that you were hoping for, but it gives people hope that they're being, being listened to. The other thing I would throw in too, and this was one of the toughest lessons I ever learned, is the first time I was a chief people officer in an organization. And I did not have a real sense of how deeply broken the HR function was in this company. And so here I was, first time I'd ever been a chief people officer. I was excited. I want to make a splash. And I got my team all jazzed up saying, our goal is 3 years from now, we're going to be written up in articles about being one of the best HR. But just, oh my gosh, John, when I think about what I did, I'm embarrassed by it because they believed in me. I had a pretty solid reputation. The other functions that I was leading, it's like, this guy knows what he's doing. He's going to lead us to the promised land. I remember the first budget I proposed to the CEO because one of my thoughts was I only get one time to make my first budget presentation, so I'm going big. And he knew how broken HR was, and I came in with a number that was ridiculous, and it gave him sticker shock. And as I talked about it with my other senior leaders, the feedback they gave me is, Doug, all these ideas are great. First step for you and your team, go fix the basics. Because what you're talking about here, all the bells and whistles of high performing HR organizations, you need to get to a point where you can get the positions filled when you've got to get to the point where we have confidence in your payroll department to pay our people on time. And it was, John, it was just this litany of take care of the fundamental basics first.
Yep.
And prove that you can do that well before we're going to approve all this spending for the stuff that's going to add value, but not now. We were years away from making that kind of investment. And oh my gosh, it crushes my heart to even think about going back to my team. And I'd worked so hard to get them pumped up and, we're going to be the case study of to say, guys, our reputation is not strong out there. We are not serving our customers well. So we've got to totally rethink our priorities and what needs to change. So, and I wish I could say there was a happy ending to that story. I was in that role for about a couple years, and a lot of things happened, and I walked away from it. So I don't know what the end to that story was, but I will never forget what a disservice I was to that team and the way I handled talking about change and their expectations. And I had to go from talking about big wins to the smaller wins that we need to execute well before we can move forward.
Yeah. Well, so maybe another tactic emerging here is the reality check.
Yep.
As we think about that vision that we want to achieve over the long haul, 3 to 5 years, let's say, the reality check of where are we at today? And as you and I have said, I think multiple times in podcast episodes, both as leaders and as organizations, you begin the journey where you're at, not where you'd like to be.
Right.
And so in that HR, it's easy to come in there and be really excited around the possibilities. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but without the reality check, yeah, we're focused on the wrong things and potentially, building, some exciting new stuff on a house of cards.
Yes.
And so, as you think about whether it's the executive table or functional area, that first team conversation is, let's think about those priorities. What would have to be true? What are those top 3 or 4 things? And then what's the reality check of where we're at today? How far off are we from that? I remember there was years ago, I don't even know who authored it, but there was a tool that was used in a lot of the turnaround situations that I was put into. And this is when I was on the operations side of the business. And I would step into operations that were, broken and, be tapped to come in and get it turned around. And so we used a tool called the Stairway to Excellence. And it's a very simple tool. It's just a step ladder, and there was 4 rungs. And you just took an honest snapshot of where is this particular operation or this part of the organization, what's its current status? And I think the bottom rung was breakdown.
Yep.
And within that rung of the ladder, you had a bucket. What has to happen when you're in breakdown mode? And it's basic blocking and tackling. We got to get staffed. We've got to get credibility back. We've got to, just basics. And then not until you're out of that do you start to think about, okay,
Yep.
how do we get to good performance? And I think the top rung as you moved up was excelling. And only
Yep.
at excelling could you really think about, let's now come up with some futuristic change initiatives that move this part of the organization or the whole organization into
Yep.
the future. And so that reality check is really important. And is there alignment around that across the first team on where we're currently at? As it relates to the organization as a whole,
Yep.
I've seen, high level conversations go really well when the executive team gets to be honest with each other around their respective departments.
Yes.
Hey, you're talking as if your department is, at the excelling rung. I think the perspective that's shared amongst the rest of us is we're closer to breakdown mode. And so that level of calibration is huge in the reality check.
Well, and John, the story that I shared is exactly what happened to me. I came in there with proposed changes and the supporting budget that spoke more to that excelling rung of the ladder. And those colleagues were quick to tell me that's not the kind of organization you have right now. It is severely broken, and you need to fix those basics. And John, especially at the senior level of organizations, that conversation can go really well or not so well. And it goes well if you have full confidence and trust in your colleagues around the table that, the critique that they're giving of your organization is meant to be helpful.
Yes.
It's meant to serve the broader organization versus just think about us as human beings. Somebody comes up and gives us a piece of critical feedback, and says, "Wow, your outfit sucks
Yeah.
today. You look terrible." And
Your
then you
house
respond, "Well, have
stinks.
you looked in a mirror yet? Or, you're not so good looking yourself." So it's that, that type of response that just destroys organizations. But when you can have a leadership team at any level in the organization, but particularly at the senior levels, they can be candid with each other, express their point of view, and we don't get defensive. We try to understand it better. We may not agree with it and their perspective, but the reality is that's their perspective. That's the reality they have of my organization. And until that perspective changes, it's going to be much more challenging to move forward.
Yeah. The other place that this shows up too, in terms of being, having this reality check, being really honest around where either the organization or maybe my respective area is at, I've seen it play out as well when we think about the interdependencies that change brings. Meaning, we're going to propose an idea here that is, let's just say, for example, led by the marketing team, but it has a heavy dependency on the IT function. That's another area where you need to honor, well, where is that respective department, that supporting cast at right now? And I'm thinking of a particular situation where, as the head of learning, I wanted to launch a new learning management system. And so, for any of our listeners out there that have ever touched a learning management system, it
Yep.
has some heavy dependency on its integration within your IT ecosystem, if you will. And I remember getting very frustrated as I worked with the IT team to, garner their support and understand what resources they could commit. And having to sit down with the chief information officer at one point and have him tell me, this is not going to happen this year, and here's why. And having this individual tell me, we're broken right now. We're not even answering support tickets. We're not
Yep.
supporting the organization. Our credibility is shot. I'm excited for you with your learning management system, but we're a ways off from that. And we've got to build up our foundation before we can support something like that. And that I'd like to say I handled that really well at the time and was understanding. I didn't. I was very
Right.
critical of that individual and very much, well, you're ugly. Your department's ugly. And definitely not the right way to handle it, because that took a lot of courage again.
Yep.
A lot of vulnerability for that individual to say, we're not good enough yet to support that. And so another area where this reality check needs to take place is in those interdependencies. It's one thing to say, hey, we're just going to do these 3 or 4 things. How hard could it be? Well, as you get into the ins and outs of what's going on within the functional areas and departments of an organization,
Yep.
things can get, one initiative becomes 25 different tactical line items very quickly. And so having the courage to have those type of, interdepartmental conversations and reality checks taking place, it's not just at the first team table.
Well, and John, I'll add to this, and this starts to get us, to um, that moment of change being approved and whatever that is, and then how do you effectively manage that? And that'll be the focus of our next conversation. I mentioned the one organization where I was a leader. We actually had a function that was that funnel
Yep.
for these ideas. So one of the things that was very helpful, since I was leading a support department that, to your point, it wasn't IT, but I had organizations that would commonly need resources to support a lot of these big initiatives. So any major initiative, and we had a way of defining that, the development of the resources needed for that change initiative were managed, coming up with that final budget within that department. And so what would happen is they would come to me and say, okay, through the vetting process, here are the major change initiatives that they've made the cut.
Yep.
And now we need to really sharpen our pencil. So now I'm really aging myself and understand what's the financial impact of this. And so I would then have the chance to go back to my team and say, here are 5 initiatives that the organization's looking for. Let us talk about how's this going to impact us in terms of our time, our resources. Let's size it. And then our deliverable back to that organization to say, here's the FTEs.
Right.
They're going to be needed to support this, or consulting dollars that are going to need to be support, or whatever costs we could think about. And John, it's amazing to me how many organizations that I worked in never took that approach. X department would have their initiative and they would put in a plug number for that initiative, not really fully understanding who else is going to be impacted by this. And then it gets approved, and then they get frustrated when the IT department or the training department, whatever it is slow to support. It's like, we didn't know it was coming, and we don't have the resources to support it. So if that rings true in the organization, if you're listening to this, and by the way, I'm not talking about Fortune 500 companies need to have this even smaller organizations can adapt this kind of mindset and mentality around their change initiatives
Yes.
to really, as much as you can, get an accurate accounting and perspective of what that's going to cost. So anyway, I want to put that out there because there are systematic things that you can do, some discipline that once you start to really get into the vetting process, start to narrow these things down, to really take a hard look at it and understand the financial impact it's going to have, resources required, and then there's the broader impact on the organization. Just excuse me, the stress and pressure that it can create. By itself, it's a great project, but you combine this with 6 other initiatives, we're going to put the organization on overload.
Yeah. Yeah. I was exposed to a similar process that I felt was extremely effective. And it was basically a business case process where you had a template and a process you had to follow as the initiator of a change idea. Okay. So I'm going to implement this new program or this new piece of software or whatever it was. It was on me as the owner of that to go find out as I crafted
Yep.
my business case, 0.5 of an FTE from IT required for how long? How much investment in contractors? What's the expected ROI? And so putting all that together, I think is it's cumbersome, but doing that level of due diligence, I think, avoids a lot of friction points, a lot of siloing, a lot of frustrations that can otherwise take place when you aren't having those conversations, or when you assume, oh, IT ought to be able to support whatever we're doing.
Yep.
Well, maybe not. Which leads me to another thought that I've seen, really important for us to honor, when we think about change and its connection to the vision and strategy of an organization, it's very easy to get excited about that and start thinking in terms of new, right? Innovative, new ideas, futuristic, which change oftentimes that's what it's about. But we also have to appreciate, so going back to that Stairway to Excellence tool as an example, the basic blocking and tackling that takes place at the breakdown level. So if our current state is we're in breakdown mode, as you move your organization or team up to a level of excelling, that blocking and tackling never goes away. So it builds upon itself. And so the things that we are doing as an organization and the things that our departments are doing to support the organization to, let's just say, keep the lights on, it's an important part of our capacity to honor as part of these conversations and this process, that we can't just stop keeping the lights on. And I think that's something to come to terms with as well as any team, any first team, but certainly as an executive team. What percentage of capacity at this table or within our respective departments needs to be held for just keeping the lights on? It's not going to be new, sexy, exciting, innovative change. It's the basic blocking and tackling that needs to continue to happen that helps this organization go round. And so my mind does gravitate to some of the supporting cast departments that
Right.
maybe their job in some organizations, if we're really honest with ourselves, is not to bring forth the best in class, whatever. It's to support the organization. It's to keep our lights on. And I think the more we can have those types of conversations, the more we get people at the table that are willing to compromise because they understand their role within the organization and how their respective department is intended to support the broader vision. You're not here to be the tip of the spear. You're here to support us. And here's how. And yeah, sometimes does that mean we need you to bring a new innovative way of supporting the organization? Yes. But what level of capacity has to be reserved for just keeping our darn lights on? Maintenance.
Well, it can be I think a challenging thing for individuals to come to terms with. There's a book, I think it came out about the mid 90s. The title intrigued me. It was called The Myth of Excellence, and it very much fits with what you're describing. And the big headline from this book is get real clear on what your organization needs to excel at to be successful, however you define that, and then very intentionally understand what are the functional areas of your organization that you need to be okay at.
Yep.
It's not that critical to your strategy. And say if you're leading a human resource organization, if you're in a company, it's like we just need to be pretty good.
Yep.
At HR, not outstanding. Well, how do you message that
Yeah, it's not
as a
exciting.
leader to folks? Is like just get in here every day and get ready to be average. It's tough. It can be done, and if you got individuals on your team that's not what they're looking for, they need to be working on an HR team that's at the forefront of whatever is going on in HR these days, and they're going to need to find that somewhere else. So I think we have an obligation as leaders to make it clear what are our targets, what's our role in this organization, what are the things that we really have to excel at, what are the things that we just need to be solid at, get the basics right. And because without that clarity, you're going to make some really dumb decisions
Yeah.
about what change you're embracing and not embracing. So anyway, I find that concept to be really interesting to talk to people about. Is like, what do you just need to be good enough at? And people will bristle at that, say, well, we have to be good at it. No, you don't. In fact, if you take a look at highly successful organizations, if you pop open the hood, it becomes clear to you pretty quickly. Here are the things that they excel at that really drive the success of their organization. Then here's the rest of it, that they're good at it, but they're not great at it. And they're not spending a lot of dollars with change and innovation in those areas.
Yeah, there's a couple other aspects of research that tie to this. One was a book I was mentioning as you and I were kind of chatting, about today's episode, which was Uncommon Service by Frances Fry. And she did a wonderful job of shadowing some very successful service related organizations. It's probably a bad example today, but back when she wrote it, Southwest Airlines was one of her prime
Mm.
examples. They obviously
Yep.
changed some things, but at the time she wrote it, Southwest was known, at being at the forefront in terms of organizations with discipline, of having the courage as an organization to be as forthright and honest with themselves around what they are not as they are with what they are.
Yep.
Here's what we aren't going to do, we aren't going to stand for, versus here's what we are. And so, what she talked about in her research, the result of all of it was, if you're not careful and you allow people to kind of, run off and, pet projects and do their own thing,
Yep.
and your organization is going in a million different directions at once, you actually end up in a place that she described as exhausted mediocrity, where you've got a bunch of things going on, but you're not terribly good at any of them, and everyone's dog tired.
Yep.
And it's just a terrible place to be. And so the compromise sometimes is, what are we not going to be great at?
Yep.
And so the other body of research I'd point to is it's more on a personal development note, but I think it ties into organizations, is the work that Don Clifton did around StrengthsFinder.
Right.
And his notion that, there really isn't such thing as a well-rounded person. And actually well-rounded people in his estimation were kind of dull. And so as he studied, top performing, leaders and executives and organizations, he described them as sharp. They were good in a handful of areas, and everywhere else, they just managed it enough to avoid failure. And so I really believe that same thinking applies to organizations. We got to be really sharp in a few very specific areas, and everywhere else, we just, to your point, Doug, we need to be good enough.
Yep.
And, I don't want to pick on any of the supporting departments and teams because it differs by organization, but sometimes, the legal team just needs to hear, keep us from getting sued.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep.
IT team, keep our lights on, keep the phones working. Versus, other organizations, you're at the forefront, IT. We are an IT organization. Maybe that does make sense. But when we're not honest about it, I think we end up, in a troublesome place. And, from a leadership perspective, you start leading people astray. You're really leading people on. And so if you've hired someone to come aboard and be in your department and do something innovative and exciting, and we haven't been honest with them around the role that our part of the organization plays, you get some pretty frustrated members of the team pretty quickly.
Yep.
So, having that courage, again, to be very clear from the forefront, here's what our, piece of the pie is. Here's how we support the organization's vision. Those are tough conversations to have, because you can feel like, boy, I'm taking the wind out of someone's sails. And so you have to figure out how to have those conversations and how to navigate those. And so the one example I could think of an organization that was met, as they delivered that message of clarity to maybe some of the supporting departments around, we're not going to be best in class in some of these areas. We're going to be average. They focused on doing some job rotations and getting people within those supporting cast departments who weren't that excited around just keeping the lights on, opportunities to do innovative things in other areas.
Yep.
And so getting a little bit into the weeds here, but as you think about the priorities of an organization that then become change initiatives, as you zoom into the departments and functional areas and consider what interdependencies are required for this project to be successful in the selection of the people who will participate from those departments, you target those people who know, they have an innovative, creative side to them that is, we need to pay attention to, and we need to foster that. And so I think, courage is really sticking out to me here as something that has to be, well in hand as an organization to be successful with change, having the courage to say no to things, having the courage to provide people clarity that may feel at first limiting, but it's actually liberating, because you liberate people from wasted effort, spending time on pet projects and tasks that, don't add up. So good stuff. Good insights here. Well, I look forward to continuing this change conversation, because I think there's more to talk about in terms of the change model, if you will, and we'll refer a
Right.
ton to, again, our listeners. If you want additional information, Pritchett is an organization you will hear us continue to refer to. Because in my experience, as we look at their model in upcoming conversations, what I appreciate about Pritchett, what they've done is the world is full of models and process components, tools, resources that support the process side of change. What we really intend to dig into, and hopefully you've been hearing this in this first episode around change, is the people side of change, the human side. And so even as we talk about the process of change that people go through, you're going to hear us talk about emotions and people and navigating all that. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, good stuff, Doug.
Well,
and final thoughts?
Other than this, you can tell it's winter.
You're all choked up on this change thing.
I am. It's an emotional. You talk about emotions with people. You've got me choked up, John, as you have routinely done in our relationship over the years. No, thank you for the conversation today. I'm excited about kind of the going in assumption for our next conversations. Decisions have been made. Priorities have been set. We've said yes to things. We've said no to things. Now the table is set. Here's what we're facing as an organization. We'll explore, I think, some really powerful ideas around then how do you do that well? And what are some of the watch out fors when it comes to actually making change happen inside an organization?
Absolutely. Look forward to that conversation with you, Doug. And hopefully all of you get a chance to tune in for that. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.